Hey everybody, welcome back. We're going to be taking a deep dive today into something that I think is on a lot of people's minds, but we don't often talk about it, and that is what really matters at the end of life. We've got this really interesting script here from another podcast that sort of explores end-of-life reflections and a lot of the research that they did and some of the interviews that they conducted. And get ready to have your minds blown, because there are some really universal things that come out of thinking about and considering death that I think, it's not just for the very old or people who are facing the end of their lives. I think this is something that can be really valuable for everyone to think about and to kind of wrap our heads around. So, I guess before we dive in, I'm curious, have you ever thought about what people think about when they know that they're, approaching their final days?
It's interesting because it's not really a morbid obsession or anything. It's just like a natural human process, as we get older, or if we're confronted with a serious illness. Thinking about these things and facing these existential questions just naturally sort of comes to the forefront.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And, our source material here kind of talks about that and says, this isn't just anecdotal evidence either. There have been researchers who have talked to a lot of older adults and those who are caring for people, who are approaching the end of their lives. And some really consistent themes have emerged about what people prioritize as they get closer to that time in their lives.
And it's really not about amassing wealth or chasing these big career goals anymore. The focus really shifts to things like quality of life and being able to maintain some control over their care as much as possible, and, cherishing time with loved ones. It's this really profound shift away from the tangible and toward experiences and relationships.
Yeah, and this idea of quality of life over quantity really stood out to me. It's not just about living every single second that you can possibly squeeze out of life, but it's about making the moments that you do have really meaningful motions.
Absolutely. And, one of the things that stood out to me in the source material was there's a study that they cited in the Journal of Palliative Medicine. And they talked about how, for many people, the priority in their final days is really on comfort and dignity. And sometimes that means choosing to forego these really aggressive medical interventions that might prolong life a little bit longer, but could also, cause a lot of suffering. And I think it's really about achieving a sense of peace, both physically and emotionally.
Yeah, so it's not just about grasping for every last breath. It's about making the breaths that you have count for something and have some meaning to them. And I think this kind of reframes how we think about making decisions about our healthcare as we age. It's a lot to consider.
It really is. And this is one of those areas where, having those conversations that we so often try to avoid about end-of-life wishes becomes really, really crucial. Talking with our loved ones about, what kinds of medical interventions we would or wouldn't want, or, discussing things like what level of pain management feels right. These can be incredibly difficult conversations to have, but avoiding them altogether can actually lead to a lot more heartache and potentially unnecessary suffering down the line.
That's a really good point. And they also dove into the profound importance of relationships at the end of life. And it's not about, being alone in a hospital room connected to all these machines. It's about being surrounded by the people who mean the most to you.
Yeah, and there's research to back that up. There's a study that was published in a journal called Social Science and Medicine. And they found that, feeling connected to others is such a fundamental human need. And that's especially true when we're facing things like mortality. Being surrounded by loved ones can really bring this sense of peace and closure that's just invaluable. And it's not just for the person who's nearing the end of their life. The people who are providing care and companionship, they also get this sense of meaning and purpose during what can be a really challenging time.
Yeah, and it makes you think about, what kind of legacy are we leaving behind? It's not just about, what we accomplish, but about, how we impact the people that we love. And I think that's a powerful shift in perspective.
It is. It really encourages us to think about how are we nurturing those relationships right now while we still have time? Are we making time for the people who truly matter to us? Are we, expressing our love and appreciation openly and honestly? These are some really important questions to consider.
Yeah, and this is where things get really fascinating, because the source material says that reflecting on the end of life can actually inspire us to live more fully in the present. It's almost like this wake-up call to what truly matters.
Yeah, if we kind of connect that back to the shift in priorities that we were talking about earlier, it makes perfect sense. If we recognize that relationships and experiences hold the most value at the end of life, shouldn't we be prioritizing those very things right now in this very moment?
Yeah, so it's not about, waiting for some distant future to come before we start thinking about these things. It's about finding ways to make those priorities a part of our lives today.
Exactly. It begs the question, like, what activities or relationships genuinely bring you joy? How can you weave those things more intentionally into your daily life?
Yeah, it's not about like dropping everything and, becoming a recluse in the mountains. It's about finding those simple joys and appreciating the people around us and living with a sense of purpose.
Precisely. By living authentically and purposefully, now we're inherently preparing ourselves for whatever lies ahead. We may not be able to control how or when we die, but we can absolutely choose how we live. And another thing that the source material really emphasized was having these open and honest conversations about death and dying.
Yeah, it's almost like we're not supposed to talk about it like it's this taboo subject.
Right. And what's interesting is the source material said that avoiding those conversations can actually lead to more anxiety and regret later on. Imagine, for instance, not knowing a loved one's wishes for their end-of-life care and then having to make those difficult decisions without their guidance. That can be incredibly distressing for everyone involved.
Oh, absolutely. And it can be
Yeah.
so awkward to bring those conversations up. Do you have any suggestions for how we could even start talking about these things? It's not like you can just blurt it out at the dinner table.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, it doesn't have to be like this super somber, dramatic conversation or anything. You could simply share your own thoughts and feelings, about aging or end-of-life care with your loved ones. Or you could even use this very deep dive as a starting point, just something like, hey, I was listening to this interesting podcast about what people value at the end of their lives, and it got me thinking, have you ever thought about any of this?
Yeah, that's a great idea. Just a casual way to open the door without being too heavy-handed about it. And maybe by starting that conversation, we can start to normalize talking about death a little bit more.
Exactly. It's about taking away the stigma and making it okay to acknowledge our own mortality. We all experience loss at some point in our lives, and talking about death can help us prepare for those inevitable moments.
Because let's face it, death is a part of life. Pretending it doesn't exist isn't really doing anybody any favors.
Right. And these conversations can really help to ensure that our wishes are known and respected when the time comes. It also provides a lot of comfort and support to our loved ones, knowing that we've at least addressed these sensitive questions together.
It's like we're taking control of the narrative instead of just letting fear and uncertainty dictate our choices. It allows us to make informed decisions that truly reflect our values.
And that sense of agency can be incredibly empowering, both for the individual who's facing their own mortality and for their loved ones. It shifts the focus from fear and avoidance to understanding and acceptance.
So we've talked about quality of life and nurturing our relationships and having these crucial conversations about death and dying. It's a lot to process, but what does it all mean for how we live our lives right now in this moment?
And that's really the core message of this deep dive. Reflecting on the end of life isn't about becoming fixated on death. It's about using that awareness to live more fully in the present moment.
So it's not about, dwelling on the negative, but about using it as motivation for positive change.
Precisely, it's about recognizing that our time is precious and making the most of every opportunity.
It's about slowing down and appreciating those simple things, like a warm breeze or a genuine laugh with a friend, or savoring a delicious meal or having a moment of quiet contemplation.
And it's about being present in our relationships, expressing our love and gratitude, and creating memories that will last a lifetime.
It's like a shift in perspective. Instead of focusing on what we lack, we start to appreciate everything that we have.
And that gratitude can be incredibly transformative.
Yep.
It can help us find joy even in the midst of challenges.
It's about recognizing that life is a gift, even with all of its imperfections.
And that gift is something to be cherished, not taken for granted.
So knowing what we know now was one small change we can make today to live more in alignment with what truly matters. What resonated most with you from all of this?
That's a wonderful question, and I think it's one we each need to answer for ourselves. There's no right or wrong answer. It's about what feels authentic and meaningful for each individual.
Maybe it's reaching out to someone you haven't spoken to in a while, or taking a moment to just appreciate the beauty of nature.
Or maybe it's simply being more present in this moment, savoring each experience instead of just rushing through life on autopilot.
I love that it's about slowing down, paying attention, and really immersing ourselves in the richness of life.
Because ultimately, those are the moments that matter most.
The connections we forge, the experiences we share, and the love we give and receive.
Those are the elements that make life worth living, and they deserve our time and attention.
So as we kind of wrap up this deep dive into what matters at the end of life, I'm struck by how much of it's really about living.
Yeah.
It's almost ironic, isn't it?
It is a little bit of a paradox, I think. Contemplating our mortality can really inspire us to embrace life more fully. I think that's probably one of the most valuable takeaways from all of this.
Yeah, it's like knowing that our time here is finite
Hmm.
makes each moment that much more precious.
Yeah.
And it makes us want to, live a little bit more intentionally.
And it encourages us to really examine our values and make sure that our actions are lining up with what we say we believe. If we truly believe that, relationships and experiences and quality of life are what's most important at the end, then it only makes sense to prioritize those things now.
Absolutely. It's like a call to action to live authentically, to nurture our connections, and to find those simple joys in everyday moments.
Because at the end of the day, it's not the stuff that we accumulate or the awards that we win that really defines a life well lived. It's the impact that we have on other people and the memories that we create that truly matter.
This whole conversation has been so thought-provoking for me. It's not about being afraid of death. It's about using this awareness of death to create a more meaningful and fulfilling life.
It is powerful stuff.
It is, and it highlights the fact that we all have the power to choose how we spend our time and our energy. Are we investing in the things that truly matter? Are we making choices that reflect our values and bring us joy? Those are questions worth thinking about. So for everyone listening out there, I want to leave you with this. Knowing what you know now, what's one small change you can make today to live more in alignment with what truly matters to you?
Maybe it's something as simple as sending a text message to a loved one, expressing your gratitude, or just taking a few moments to appreciate the beauty of the world around you.
Yeah, those small but meaningful shifts can have such a profound impact on our lives. They help us connect more deeply with ourselves and with others.
Because in the end, that's what it's all about, embracing life fully and living with intention.
Well, thank you so much for joining us on this journey today. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep living with purpose.
And remember, life is a gift. Embrace it fully.